On March 31st, 2010, Teresa Stone arrived at her husband's insurance agency and walked into her worst nightmare. Her husband of nearly 20 years, Randy Stone, was dead right there on the office floor. This was obviously a homicide, but who would have wanted to hurt Randy Stone? He was well known and well loved by everyone in the community, but apparently there was at least one person in Randy's circle who wanted to see him dead, because it didn't take long for police to figure out that this was not a random attack. Randy knew his killer personally, and police discovered their first major clue discarded in a trash can just feet away from Randy's dead body. And this clue would lead them to the most unlikely place, the New Hope Baptist Church. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Summer Sanchez, and on this channel we talk about crime, cults, and heinous history. So if that sounds interesting to you, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss an upload. Today we are talking about the very messy, very tragic case of Randy Stone. Before we get into today's case, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Scentbird. Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service that allows you to try out new perfumes and colognes every single month. They have a ton of different options. They offer over 600 different fragrances, and these fragrances range from well-known higher-end brands to lesser-known indie brands. And I love that I don't have to physically go to a shop and try out a billion different options. Scentbird delivers them right to my door, and they give you a generous amount of product too. There's about a 30-day supply in each of these cute little vials, and this gives you a chance to really get a feel for the fragrance, really test it out. The perfume vial cases are really nice and convenient. They're sleek and cute, and they're small enough to just toss into your bag and take them with you on the go. Scentbird lets you choose your own perfumes too, so you know exactly what you're getting. And their website has really good descriptions of all the scents. They list out all the different notes in each scent. I find them very helpful when I'm trying to decide which perfume to pick. This month I received the 7 Virtues Amber Vanilla, Versace Crystal Noir, and Dime 7 Summers. And I have to say I had a pretty hard time choosing my favorite this month, but I think I have to give the edge to the 7 Virtues Amber Vanilla. The card says that it's an aromatherapy perfume and it magnifies your natural scent to give you a clean second skin effect. It smells amazing. It has notes of amber, pink carnation, skin musks, and of course vanilla. And I am definitely a vanilla kind of girl when it comes to perfumes and even candles. I have a ton of vanilla candles in my house. If you do decide to try out Scentbird, I am telling you, add this one to your list. It smells absolutely amazing. And you can go to scentbird.com and use my code SUMMER55 off to get 55% off your first month at Scentbird. Thanks again to Scentbird for keeping me smelling good all year long and for sponsoring today's video. And now let's jump into the case. On March 31st, 2010, 39-year-old Teresa Stone spent the afternoon going to appointments and running errands before heading to her husband's insurance business in Independence, Missouri. Teresa helped her husband, 43-year-old Randy Stone, run the insurance agency, and together over the years, the two of them had grown a pretty successful business. Teresa had worked in the office most of that morning, but she had spent the afternoon doing stuff around town, shopping, running errands, stuff like that. After she was done with her errands, Teresa headed back up to the office to finish out the workday. But as soon as she pulled into the parking lot, she knew something wasn't right. The office looked like it was closed down for the day. The blinds were all shut the way they would be during non-business hours, and Randy's car was still in the parking lot in the same spot that he always parked in. So Teresa knew he was still there, but everything looked dark. So Teresa parks her car right next to Randy's car. She gets out and she walks up to the front office door, but when she tried to open the door, it was locked. Again, this was odd. That door was never locked during business hours. So Teresa got out her keys and she unlocked the door, and as soon as she stepped inside, she noticed how dark it was in the office. All of the lights were off and it was eerily quiet. Teresa slowly walked into Randy's office to look for him, but he wasn't in there. Nothing looked disturbed though. Randy's computer was still on as if he had just recently been working at his desk. So Teresa then peeks into a storage room to see if Randy's in there. But again, there was no Randy and there was nothing out of place. So Teresa then walked into her office. As soon as Teresa opened her office door, she saw her husband lying on the floor completely motionless in a pool of blood. Randy had blood pouring out of his ears, his skin was discolored, and his lips were blue. And Teresa panics. She steps over Randy, she grabs her office phone, and she starts calling for help. She called the first number she could think of, and that was her parents' phone number. And she tells them everything. She says, "I was running errands. When I got back to the office, I found Randy. He's been shot and he's dead on the floor." Teresa's parents are like, "Okay, you need to call for help. You need to hang up with us and you need to call 911. And that's exactly what Teresa does. She hangs up the phone and she calls 911. She tells the operator that she doesn't know what happened to Randy, but he's unresponsive, lying on the floor of her office. She says his skin is discolored, there's blood coming out of his ears, and she says, "I don't know what's going on. Maybe he fell or something. I don't know, but we need help immediately." As the the police pull up to the agency, Teresa runs out of the building and she basically falls into one of the officer's arms and she's just sobbing and she's trying to tell them what she's just seen. So police cautiously walk inside because at this point they don't know if whoever did this is still in the building. If Randy really is dead, if someone had killed him, is the killer still in the building? So they walk in cautiously and they check all the rooms of the building and they confirm that there is no one else there. And they also confirm that Randy is in fact dead and he looks like he's been shot. He had been shot once in the head at close range with a .40 caliber handgun. And they knew that it was a .40 caliber right off the bat because they actually found a shell casing lying on the ground right by Randy's dead body. So police, they start putting up caution tape and they immediately start taking crime scene photos. They start looking for evidence, anything that can shed some light on the situation. They end up finding some money sitting out on the desk. About $150 in cash is just sitting right there on the desk next to Randy's body. So police ruled out a robbery pretty much from the very beginning. If someone had murdered Randy during like a robbery gone wrong, then that money surely would have been picked up. It was literally right there for the taking. And as far as they could tell, nothing had been taken from the agency. And there were no signs of like a forced entry or a struggle, so this just didn't seem like a random murder. The police had decided pretty much from the start that this had to be someone that Randy knew personally. Now, as police are gathering clues and taking photos and stuff, several people had started to arrive on the scene. After Teresa had made that phone call to her parents, news of Randy's death really started to travel fast. Relatives and friends of the Stones started showing up outside of the agency. Even the pastor of the Stones church, David Love, and his wife Kim showed up on the scene to offer their support. Kim and David comforted Teresa, and Kim even walked with Teresa to a nearby bathroom so she could go in and, splash some water on her face and try to calm down a bit. Teresa is eventually taken down to the station so she could give a statement about everything, that had happened that day and answer some questions that might help to shed some light on the case and point investigators in the right direction. Say hello. He won't stop crying at me, so he's going to sit on my lap while I record. So Teresa starts by giving police a play-by-play of her movements that day.
Well, I was supposed to be up there at 1:45 to fill out paperwork, and my appointment was actually at 2.
Okay.
But the bank was kind of slow, so I didn't actually get there until about 10 till. And I left there about 2:15. So I had about an hour to spare. So I went shopping to Dress Barn.
That's right.
So I left Dress Barn about 2:41.
She tells them that she had been at work that morning, but that she had left early that afternoon and she had receipts. She said that she had went to several different stores and appointments. And as police are listening to Teresa tell them all of this, they're noticing that there are no tears in her eyes. She's talking in this like cry voice, but they don't see any actual tears coming out.
I saw blood coming out of his ear.
Okay, blood coming out of his ear.
And his eye was really puffy. And his skin was really discolored. And I noticed he wasn't breathing.
In fact, earlier in the car on the way over from the station, Teresa wasn't crying then either. She even told the officer who was driving her over to the station that she was sorry that she wasn't more upset, but she was all cried out. Again, she had just discovered her husband's dead body, but there was no emotion. Of course, people grieve in all different ways, but not only had her husband of 20 years just died, but he had been murdered and she had been the one to find him. But she's all cried out, she says, and now she's just very calmly giving this statement. I just don't think that that's a typical response, and the police didn't think so either. And so the investigators were already a little suspicious of Teresa. They asked her during this interview about the gun that was used in the murder. They had already determined that the murder weapon was a .40 caliber handgun. Like I said, they had found out that Randy actually owned a .40 caliber handgun. But Teresa told them that Randy no longer had that gun. He had actually sold it a while back ago. She said she didn't know who he sold it to. She didn't know anything about the sale. She just knew that he sold it. And then police turned up the heat when they dropped a bombshell. During their initial search of the crime scene, they discovered something very interesting in the trash can just feet away from Randy's dead body. Ripped up into several pieces was a love letter, and it was written by someone that the police had already pretty much determined was not Randy Stone. The handwriting didn't look anything like the handwriting that was written on paperwork from Randy's office. And this letter had obviously been written for Teresa. I'm not going to read out the entire letter, but I will tell you what some of it said, "Happy birthday, love. You are so very precious to my heart. You possess the most tender spot in my heart. I care for you more than anyone else on earth, and I desire to be with you every moment of every day. Your birthday is my favorite day. I remember 9 years ago telling you that I had something for you in my office. It was me. I wanted to give you me. That kiss you took and then you gave me one back. I felt like it was my birthday. Now your birthday has become a sort of anniversary for me. I love this day so much, and it is all about you, the most amazing woman in all the world. I love you so much." So the police let Teresa finish giving her statement, and then they just casually mentioned this letter. They didn't call it a love letter. They said, we found a letter ripped up in the trash can in your office, and it was like a happy birthday letter or something. And you can just tell by the look on Teresa's face that she was like, oh shit.
In your trash can, they had a letter that somebody had written about happy birthday and all that. It's about this big. It was all tore up.
She started acting confused, like she didn't know what they were talking about. She was like furrowing her brow, like she was trying really hard to figure out what this letter was all about. So the police are like, okay, you know what? We actually have the letter here. We're going to go get it for you so it can kind of jog your memory. And so the investigators get up, they walk out of the interview room, and they leave Teresa alone. And as soon as they were gone, Teresa can be heard on camera saying, "Great, I forgot about that." So Teresa had to think fast to explain away this letter. And so when investigators came back in, Teresa says, "Oh yeah, you know what? I actually do remember that letter. That was actually from a secret admirer. And it was given to me years ago. I don't even know who the person was. I never found out who they were. I never met them. But whoever it was put the letter on my car and I found it one day. And I don't know, I just stuck it into my purse and forgot all about it."
It was left on my car door. That's been several years ago. And I just found it the other day. I was looking for my dental card,
Yeah.
and I found it in there. And
Where was that? A drawer? Or?
no, it was in my purse. I have a little thingy that I keep all my credit cards in,
Yeah.
and it was in there.
Who's the secret admirer?
I don't know who he is.
Now, the police knew that this story couldn't be true because the wording in that letter was very specific. Whoever wrote that letter to Teresa knew her personally and probably intimately. In that letter, the person said that whoever this was and Teresa had kissed 9 years ago in their office. It said things like, "I love you so much. You're the most amazing woman in the world. You possess the most tender spot in my heart." Based on the wording of that letter, it definitely seems like Teresa knows who wrote it. So they're pretty sure that she's flat out lying about this letter. They believe that Teresa knows who wrote that letter, that she is in a relationship with this person, and the letter also implied that whoever wrote this letter has been in a relationship with Teresa for at least 9 years. Also, when Teresa called her parents, she told them that Randy had been shot. He was shot and he was dead on the office floor. But when she talked to the 911 operator, she told them that she didn't know what happened to Randy. Maybe he fell or something. Police also found out that after Teresa hung up with her parents, it took her 7 minutes to call 911. So what was she doing in those 7 minutes? By the end of that interview, the police strongly believed that Teresa was involved in Randy's murder in some way, but they needed more proof, so they let Teresa go for now. And Teresa seemingly had no clue that the police were onto her. She seemed like she was pretty happy with her performance, and her actions in the days following the murder were suspicious. First of all, just one day after her husband had been murdered, Teresa went to a tanning salon and had herself a nice, relaxing tan. And before she left the tanning salon, she asked them to transfer her dead husband's remaining prepaid tanning credits to her account since he wouldn't be needing them anymore. Teresa also immediately started looking into Randy's life insurance policies. You know how when a loved one passes away, friends and family will show up to your house, they'll come and visit, they'll bring food and like groceries and flowers and stuff. Well, in the days after Randy's murder, lots of people were stopping by Teresa's house. And some of those people started to notice that Teresa didn't seem very upset. She would only sort of cry when a new person would come to the house. She would like cry for a second and then she would just completely stop and be talking totally normal. One of the people who stopped by Teresa's house the day after the murder was a man named Robert Davis. Robert was a longtime friend of Teresa and Randy's, and he was also an insurance agent just like Randy had been. And when he stopped by to, pay his condolences, Teresa gave him a hug and she seemed really upset at first, and Robert's trying to console her. And then Teresa tells Robert that she really needs to speak with with him in private. So they go into another room. As soon as they got into this room, Teresa's demeanor completely changed. She had completely stopped crying. She was no longer acting upset. She just wanted to know about Randy's life insurance payout. Robert Davis later said that there was paperwork spread out all over the desk, like Teresa had went through all of Randy's papers and she was really trying to figure out just how much money she was going to be getting. And Robert Davis felt like this was really strange. This was the day after Randy was murdered and they didn't even have the death certificate yet. He was really put off by Teresa's behavior and alarm bells started going off big time. Now, the police immediately started checking into Teresa's alibi. She had given them a list of places that she had supposedly been the day of the murder. So they went down the list and they went to each and every place that Teresa had said that she had been, and everything actually checked out. She was telling the truth about where she had been that day. Randy's funeral was held on April 6th and the church was completely packed. So many people showed up to pay their respects and to say goodbye to a really loved member of the community. And the police were also there that day. They wanted to sort of people watch, see if anyone stood out, acted strangely. Maybe they would get a lead. And police did have a pretty interesting conversation with Robert Davis that day. He told them all about that weird interaction that he had had with Teresa that day at her house, the day after Randy's murder. He told them that Teresa seemed like she wasn't actually upset. He said that she just really wanted to know about Randy's life insurance payout. And police found that information very interesting. The Stones' pastor, David Love, gave the eulogy that day. He had known Randy for years and they had gotten really close. And so the eulogy seemed very heartfelt and very personal.
We weep not just because of the separation from our loved one, but because of all the questions that death brings. Questions like why? Why him? Why now?
But those words would not age well at all because a huge secret was about to be revealed. So the police started questioning the people closest to Randy, and a lot of people that they questioned were members of the New Hope Baptist Church where Randy and Teresa had been parishioners for years, like over 20 years. And a lot of the New Hope Baptist Church members were telling police the same thing. They told police that for years, rumors had been swirling around the church that Teresa Stone and Pastor David Love were having an affair. And police started to think that Pastor Love was probably the author of that love letter. As it turns out, David Love and Teresa Stone had been involved in a very serious sexual affair for nearly 10 years. And once investigators learned about that, the pieces of the puzzle all started to fall into place. So Teresa was born in 1971 in Kansas City, Missouri, and she actually grew up right down the street from Randy. Randy was 4 years older than Teresa, but he and his siblings would hang out and play with Teresa, and they all basically grew up together. After Randy graduated from high school, he joined the Marines, and by the time he returned home 4 years later, Teresa was grown up. She was a woman now. She was 18, and she and Randy, they reconnected and they started hanging out. Teresa was described as a very flirty person. She was always like touching and hugging on Randy, and she was obviously interested in changing the dynamic of their relationship, and Randy was interested as well. He loved Teresa's sense of humor and her outgoing personality, and so they started dating. Randy's family was really happy about this relationship because they all knew Teresa so well. They had practically grown up together and she was kind of like one of the family. And in 1990, less than 1 year after they started their relationship, Randy and Teresa got married. They went on to have 2 children. They had a son in 1991 and 2 years later they had a daughter, and they were both very devoted to their children. Randy opened up his own branch of a farmer's insurance agency in Independence. Teresa would help out at the agency when she could while the kids were little, but once they started school, she started working with Randy at the agency full time. And with Teresa's outgoing personality and Randy's knack for business, their agency really thrived. They had built a really successful business for themselves and they seemed to be living a pretty good life. Not only was their business doing well, but they had 2 great kids and they had this really solid relationship. Randy and Teresa were always very affectionate with each other. Randy's family said that they were always like hugging on each other and kissing, and Randy loved to write, and sometimes he would write Teresa poems and letters just for no reason at all, just to show that he was thinking about her. Randy would occasionally have to travel for work, but he was always in constant contact with Teresa. They would always be on the phone with each other, or he would be writing her letters. They just looked like the perfect couple, and they genuinely seemed very much in love. And one thing that was extremely important in their marriage was church. Teresa and Randy had grown up in New Hope Baptist Church, and it became a central part of their family dynamic. They attended church all the time, like 3 times a week. Teresa would sing in the church choir. She would also volunteer at different different church functions. She would help organize various events. She was very well known in the New Hope Baptist Church, and so was Randy. He was minister of records for the church. He sat on their finance committee. Randy ran his own insurance agency, and he had experience managing money and budgets and stuff, and so this was like the perfect position for him. So like I said, things seem absolutely great for the Stone family. They built this very comfortable life. They own their own business. They have 2 beautiful children. They have an amazing church family, and they were totally in love with one another. At least that's what it looked like from the outside. But in reality, things were actually falling apart between Randy and Teresa. And it all started in 1999 when Pastor David Love arrived at New Hope Baptist Church. So I don't really know anything about David's life before he arrived at New Hope Baptist, but I do know that he had a wife named Kim and they had 2 or 3 kids. I'm actually not sure how many kids they had. It seems like David's family has stayed pretty private after this case broke, understandably. But by all accounts, as soon as David arrived at New Hope Baptist, he started turning heads. He was pretty young as far as pastors go. I think he was born in 1960, so that would have made him like 39 or 40 when he arrived. Members have said that he had a lot of energy, a lot of charisma. He had a lot of new ideas and a lot of plans for New Hope, and everyone really took to him right away. And apparently a lot of the ladies at New Hope found him very attractive. And there was some flirty behavior going on occasionally. And according to David's wife, Kim, she was used to this. According to her, David had turned heads at other churches as well. This was not anything new. And while she probably didn't like feeling like other women in the church were eyeing her husband, she seemed accepting of it. I don't know if that's the right word. She seemed to tolerate it well. But there was one member of the church who was getting a little too close with David, and that was Teresa Stone. Teresa would be very touchy with David. She was seen resting her head on David's shoulder a few times as well. And Kim would later say that she knew that there was something different about this relationship between David and Teresa. But I imagine that some people in the church wrote this behavior off as just like a close faith-based relationship between a pastor and his parishioner. At least at first, they probably did. But eventually, Teresa and David would be seen going into his office alone a lot. They said that they were having counseling sessions, and to be fair, David did have these sessions with other members of the church. Even Randy would go to David's office once a week to be counseled. So just about a year after David took over the church, he and Teresa were having a full-blown affair, and this affair became very intense very quickly. Based on that letter that David wrote Teresa, he made the first move 9 years earlier in his office. He said that he asked her to go to his office on her birthday, and that's the first time they kissed. So it seems that after months of flirty exchanges and sexual tension, David finally pushed their relationship to the next level, and he kissed Teresa for the first time that day. And that was it. After that day, they were sneaking away to see each other any chance they could get. They started meeting up for those counseling sessions way more often. By some accounts, Teresa would be seen going into David's office multiple times a day, every day. And you can just imagine what was happening during those counseling sessions at the church. This was not a little fling either. This wasn't like, they were just hooking up for the excitement or to like shake up the monotony of their lives. They were in a full-on relationship. This affair went on for 10 years, an entire decade. Teresa Stone and Pastor David Love were living double lives. On the outside, they were keeping up appearances. They were still loving towards their spouses. They were still doing things with their families. They appeared to be living their typical lives, but in secret, they were sneaking away to have sex anytime they could. David would email naked photos of himself to Teresa, and I actually don't know if Teresa sent David nude photos as well, but I know that police found naked photos of David on his computer. They also sent each other very sexual messages about all the things that they wanted to do to each other. But like I said, this was not just about sex. David and Teresa, they were falling in love with each other. They both got burner phones so they could talk to each other more often without their spouses knowing, and they even started planning their wedding. David would email Teresa asking like what type of wedding she wanted to have, and if she wanted to have flowers at the wedding, and if she did want flowers, what kind of flowers did she want? And Teresa would respond and she would say, that she did want to get married and that she wanted like a simple wedding and she maybe wanted to have a rose garden. Teresa really liked the idea of becoming a pastor's wife. She really wanted that status in the church. Remember how devoted Teresa is to New Hope Baptist. She was at that church all the time. She loved that church. She grew up in that church. So the idea of becoming like First Lady of New Hope Baptist, it sounded really good to Teresa. They were planning their lives together. They started mapping out what their futures would be when they finally left their spouses. And David's wife, Kim, she knew something was up. I'm not sure when she finally clocked on that there was something going on between David and Teresa. And to be honest, I don't know how much she knew before this case broke, but she definitely knew something. There was one day where David and Kim were at home and he told her that he needed to go into the garage.
And I thought, that's really weird. And I said, what are you doing out here? And he said, I'm just putting my shoes on. And I said, you're hiding something from me.
And when she walked into the garage, David started acting really suspicious. He started like fumbling around and acting strange, and she knew that David was hiding something. And what he was hiding was that burner phone. Kim saw messages between David and Teresa. There were messages that David sent Teresa about how much he missed her and how much he wanted to see her. And I wish that I knew more about Kim and exactly what happened and what exactly David said to convince her to stay, because she didn't leave after this. She stayed with David. I imagine that he promised to break it off with Teresa, but he didn't. And as for Randy, outwardly, he seemed like he didn't have a clue about anything. But something happened about 5 years into David and Teresa's relationship that seemed to cast some doubt in Randy's mind. In 2004, Teresa found out that she was pregnant, and David Love was most definitely the father. But Teresa acted totally normal. She acted as if this was just a baby that she and her husband had conceived together. But there was one problem with that. After the birth of their second child back in the early 90s, Randy had had a vasectomy, and it had been several years since he had had that vasectomy, and Teresa had never gotten pregnant. But now here she was supposedly pregnant with his baby. But Randy acted like he was really happy about the pregnancy. His way of thinking was that if God wanted it to happen, then God would make it happen. Plus, vasectomies aren't 100% effective, and after you have a vasectomy, you're supposed to go in and submit a semen sample so that they can make sure that the procedure worked. But Randy never did that part. He never submitted a sample. So he thought, well, maybe the procedure didn't work after all. So Randy seemingly believed that this was his and Teresa's baby. But just remember this because it comes back up later. Something happens later in the case that has definitely made people wonder just how much Randy actually knew. That baby was never born, by the way. Sadly, Teresa ended up having a miscarriage. And when she lost the baby, Teresa thought that it was a sign from God that what she was doing was wrong. She thought that she was being punished for having an affair with David. But in the end, losing the baby did not change anything. Everything stayed the same. Teresa and David still continued with their relationship. And this next part made me so angry. So remember how I mentioned earlier that Randy would go see David once a week for counseling sessions? Well, part of the reason why he was having those counseling sessions in the first place was because Teresa caught him looking at porn. She told him that he needed to go speak to the pastor because he was watching pornography. Meanwhile, she has been having so much sex with David, the same person she's sending her husband to be counseled by. Teresa had the nerve to make Randy feel dirty for watching pornography, tells him that he needs to seek help from the pastor, but in reality, Teresa's been having a 10-year affair with that same pastor. I just feel bad for Randy in all of this. He was very open to going to counseling. He wanted to be a better partner for Teresa. He wanted to be the very best he could be for her. And so he happily agreed to go and talk to David, and he poured his heart out to him. He talked all about his and Teresa's relationship. He talked about his thoughts and feelings, and Pastor David Love would give him advice and guidance. He would counsel Randy on how to be a better husband and father and how to be a better Christian. And this is just speculation on my part, but I am imagining Teresa and David talking about all the things that Randy told David in counseling, like making fun of him and mocking him. I don't know if that actually happened, but in my brain it did. And I haven't really touched on this too much, but Randy and David were actually really close. They became really good friends over the years. Randy even wrote in his journal that Pastor David Love was the most influential person in his life. So this was just like a betrayal on so many levels. And as the years went by and the affair got more and more intense, the discussion was no longer about leaving their spouses. The discussion turned to how they were going to get rid of their spouses. Teresa and David started talking about how they could kill Kim and Randy and make it look like an accident or a random act of violence. Then they planned to get married, blend their families. David would remain pastor of New Hope Baptist, and Teresa would finally live out her dream of becoming a pastor's wife. And the bonus would be the huge $800,000 life insurance payout that Teresa would get once Randy was dead. They planned to use that money to start their new lives together. Originally, the plan was for David to kill Kim first. He concocted this plan to break her neck and then put her in a car and send the car flying over a cliff. But it didn't work out. He got cold feet in the end. So he did not go through with it. Instead, he turned his attention to Randy Stone. And there was a reason why he decided to get Randy first. On March 16, 2010, just 2 weeks before the murder, Randy discovered some discrepancies in the church finances. Randy was the minister of records for the church, like I said. He was on the finance committee. And one day, while he was going over the church finances, he discovered that some of the checks that David had written out to himself from the church account did not have a second signature. A second person was supposed to sign for those checks when anyone took out money from the church funds, basically as a witness. This was the system that New Hope put into place to ensure that no one stole any of the church funds. But some of the checks that David had written out to himself didn't have a second signature, and it very much looked like David had been taking money from the church without permission for reasons no one knew. So the next day, on March 17th, Randy confronted David. He wrote an email to David resigning from his positions as Sunday school teacher and minister of records. He basically said, "I'm done. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want anything to do with it. Me and my family will be leaving the church." Randy didn't want his name mixed up with any kind of church scandal, especially anything to do with money. He owned his own business. He had an insurance agency, and he was very well known in the area. A scandal like that could really hurt Randy's business. And David started to panic because he knew that Randy could go to the authorities. He knew Randy could leak this information to the members of the church and the community. And if Randy and Teresa and their family left the church, what would that mean for David and Teresa's relationship? It would be much harder for them to see each other, to sneak off and have sex with each other on a regular basis. So because of this, all of David's attention turned to Randy. Randy would now be his first victim, not Kim. He would have to wait to take Kim out. The situation with Randy needed to be handled first, and it was decided that David would shoot Randy. Teresa gave David the code to the garage door of their house. She also gave him the code to the gun safe where Randy kept all of his weapons. David then went to Randy and Teresa's home. He took Randy's .40 caliber handgun out of the safe, and this would be the murder weapon. On March 31st, 2010, Teresa worked that morning at the agency with Randy like she normally did, but she left early in the afternoon to go run some errands and to give herself a solid alibi. We actually don't know the details of the murder because David has never given an account of what happened, but we know that at some point while Teresa was gone, David Love arrived at the insurance agency and he killed Randy Stone with a single shot with Randy's own .40 caliber handgun. At some point, he shut the blinds and locked the door. It's assumed that he did this so that no customers would come in and discover Randy's body. He then sent Teresa a text message telling her not to go back to the office alone, and she knew what that meant. She knew that Randy was dead. But Teresa did not listen. She went to the office and she discovered Randy's body. And I just want to remind you all that David Love, Randy's killer, gave the eulogy at his funeral. And when you go back and listen to some of the wording that he used, it's chilling.
We weep not just because of the separation from our loved one, but because of all the questions that death brings. Questions like why? Why him? Why now?
So after police interviewed a lot of members of New Hope Baptist and they learned about the rumors of the affair and the falling out between Randy and David, they decided to get Teresa in for another interview. By the way, this affair between Teresa and David has been referred to as the worst kept secret in New Hope Baptist. On April 20th, investigators decided to get Teresa back into the station and they started asking more questions. But this time they pretty much laid their cards out. They were like, look, your story is not adding up. We know that you know more than you're letting on. This was not a random murder. This was a planned killing. And Teresa is so phony throughout these interviews. I get severe secondhand embarrassment watching them, and I've had to watch them so many times during my research.
This was a planned killing.
No.
It was a planned, premeditated killing. And more than one person was involved.
Why?
Why?
Yes, why? Why would they do this?
You know, Teresa, you know why.
Because of me?
Eventually, Teresa breaks down and she starts talking. She admits to the affair. She admits that she and David had a very intense relationship. She also admitted that on the day of the murder, when David's wife Kim walked her to the bathroom so she could calm down, she had actually went into the stall and she destroyed that burner phone that she and David used to communicate. But as far as the murder goes, she blamed everything on David. She said David was obsessed with her and she tried to break it off, but he wouldn't leave her alone.
He wouldn't stop texting me or calling me.
A month ago, I wanted it to end. I wanted to start my life fresh with Randy.
She also said that she didn't know that David had killed Randy until after the fact. She said that David came to her house the day after the murder, and that's when he told her that he had been the one that had murdered Randy. So police then moved to the murder weapon. They start questioning Teresa about the gun that was used to kill Randy. In Teresa's initial interview with police, she told them that Randy had sold his .40 caliber handgun, but investigators now knew that that was not true. They interviewed Teresa's dad, and he told police that Randy had that .40 caliber handgun just a couple of weeks before the murder. And he knew that Randy had that gun because just a couple of weeks before the murder, Randy went out to his father-in-law's property and they had target practice together. And he had that .40 caliber with him. So evidence technicians went out to the property and they used a metal detector and they collected a bunch of shell casings. And they ended up finding 5 .40 caliber shell casings and they had them tested against the one that they found at the murder scene, and they determined that it was a match. Randy had in fact been murdered with his own gun. So the big question here was, how did David Love get that gun? If Randy kept his weapons locked up in his gun safe at home, how did David get it? Teresa's explanation was that one day David was over and she was getting something out of the safe and he must have just seen the code and remembered it. But of course we know that that wasn't true. She gave David the code. So in the end, Teresa was willing to admit to the affair, but according to her, everything else was David's fault. So investigators are like, okay, we want you to call David right now and get him to implicate himself. If he had already confessed to you once, let's see if you can get him to do it again. So right there on the spot in the interview room, Teresa calls up David and she attempts to get him to implicate himself. And again, her acting is so bad.
Pastor,
Yes.
this is Teresa.
Hi.
We need to talk.
Okay. Now?
Yes, now. I need to know.
You need to know?
I need to know. I need to know everything. I'm gonna go to the police. I can't do this anymore.
Well, I'll be right there, okay?
You can't come over.
Well,
No,
why?
you just can't. No. I want to know why. I want to know why.
Teresa, why what?
You know what?
But David wasn't saying anything. She kept trying to bait him, but I think that he knew what was going on, and so he would not admit to anything. And actually, his wife Kim took the phone from him, and she confronted Teresa. She was like, "What do you want, Teresa? Why are you calling my husband?" David ended up hanging up the phone, though, before Teresa could say anything to Kim. So that plan didn't work. Their next idea was to bring David in for questioning and see if they could get him to confess. So they brought David in that same day, but the only thing he would say is that he had an alibi. He said that he was actually across town at a funeral far away from the insurance agency at the time of the murder. And that was all he said, and then he asked for an attorney. So police again are left with a ton of circumstantial evidence, but nothing solid. They had Teresa's account, which completely threw everything on David, but nothing substantial enough to hold David yet. So they allowed him to leave after that interview. So then David went home, he confessed the affair to his wife and his kids, and then he wrote out his resignation letter to New Hope Baptist Church. In this letter, he admitted to the sin of immorality, he apologized for failing them, and he left his position as pastor of New Hope Baptist. Within just a couple of weeks, David and Kim packed up and they moved to South Carolina, and David got a job as a truck driver. And over the course of the next few months, he did his best to blend into society, and he just had to hope that police wouldn't find any substantial evidence against him and hope that he wouldn't be arrested for murder. But on November 9th, 2010, David Love was arrested and he was shipped shipped back to Missouri to face charges for the first-degree murder of Randy Stone. Prosecutors felt like they had enough to charge David with at that point. They had the ballistics evidence confirming that Randy's gun was used in the murder. They knew that David had the opportunity to get that gun from the safe. They also had Teresa's statement that David had confessed to her, and they had also looked into David's cell phone records, and they were able to disprove his alibi that he had been far away from the crime scene. The cell phone records actually placed David very close to the insurance agency at the time of the murder. And police were really hoping that after they arrested David, he would give them something, anything. They were hoping that they would get some form of information out of them, but he said nothing. They were also hoping that since Teresa had turned on David, that he would then turn on her and tell them what her involvement was in the murder. But David would not turn on Teresa. Even knowing that she had blamed everything on him and he was now facing life in prison, he still would not implicate her. He was just totally devoted to Teresa. So in preparation for David's trial, a deposition was held and Teresa voluntarily took part in the deposition. Now, the prosecutors really needed Teresa's statements in order to convict David, but they also knew that Teresa was involved more than what she was letting on. So during the deposition, the prosecutor started asking Teresa a lot of questions about the murder weapon. They still didn't know for sure how David got that gun. They had an idea. They thought that Teresa had given David the code to the gun safe, and that's how he had access to it. And so while they were questioning Teresa about the gun, they told her, we think that you gave David the code to the safe. And to their absolute shock, she actually admitted that she had given him that code. And so Teresa single-handedly implicated herself in the murder. If she would have never admitted to giving David that code, she very likely would have never been charged. David wasn't implicating her. He wasn't saying anything at all. So if Teresa would have just kept her lie to herself and played dumb about the whole gun safe situation, then they wouldn't have been able to pin anything on her. But she admitted that she had given him that code, and this meant that she was in fact involved in the murder of her husband. By giving David that code, she was helping in the murder. And not only that, but during this deposition, she also admitted that she sent David a text on March 16th, 2010, telling him that she wanted Randy dead. And if you remember, March 16th was the day that Randy found out about the missing church funds. So what likely happened is Randy found out about the missing funds on the 16th. He went home and told Teresa about it. He probably said, I'm resigning and we're leaving the church. Teresa probably panicked because she didn't want to leave New Hope because that meant leaving David. So she sent David that text telling him that she really wanted Randy dead. So Teresa single-handedly sealed her own fate during that deposition, and now prosecutors had enough evidence to bring charges against her as well. Teresa Stone was finally arrested and she was charged with conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree. David Love's lawyers ended up asking for a plea deal. They said that David was prepared to plead guilty, but only if they reduced the charges to second-degree murder. The offer was accepted. David Love pleaded guilty and he was sentenced to life with parole eligibility after 25 years. And again, investigators were really hoping that they would now get a statement from David. He already admitted to the murder. He's been sentenced already. He has nothing else to lose. But David wouldn't say a word, and that's why we still don't know exactly what happened that day in the insurance agency, and we still don't know where the murder weapon is. And we still don't know the full extent of Teresa's involvement. He stayed loyal to her to the end. And this really sucked for the prosecutors in Teresa's case because all they had to go on was what Teresa had admitted to in the deposition. So they ended up offering Teresa a plea deal. They said that if Teresa pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, they would put a cap on her potential sentence. 10 years would be the maximum sentence she could receive. Teresa agreed, and during her sentencing hearing, family members from Randy's family and Teresa's family gave statements. Some of them were giving statements in favor of the maximum sentence of 10 years, and others, like Teresa and Randy's children, were begging the judge to be lenient on their mom.
She has robbed their children of their father, memories which they deserve to have with him.
I know what my mother has done, and that she has made very bad choices, and that's why we're here.
Losing my dad was extremely hard, but losing my mom would be harder.
Teresa also gave a statement, and she was begging the judge to have mercy on her.
I'm so sorry. that I have allowed myself to get caught up in these bad choices that have led to the death of my husband.
In the end, Teresa was sentenced to 8 years for conspiracy to commit murder. And Teresa actually seemed shocked that she received 8 years. It was like she thought she would just be let completely off the hook. Because she had helped out so much in David's case, she expected to get next to nothing. And remember earlier when I said that people now wonder just how much Randy knew about Teresa and David's relationship? Well, right after Randy's murder, when Teresa started trying to cash in on his life insurance policy, it was discovered that Randy had secretly changed the beneficiary from Teresa to their children. The money would only go to their 2 kids. And he had made that policy change right after Teresa announced that she was pregnant. So this was a huge shock to everyone, and it made a lot of people wonder how much Randy knew. It definitely seems like he knew more than he was letting on. David Love is serving his sentence in the Southeast Correctional Center in Charleston, Missouri, and he is eligible for parole in 2036. He will be in his 70s. And Teresa Stone is actually now a free woman. She served her time and she was released, and sources say as of 2022, she was living with a new partner in Kansas City, Missouri. And that is all I have on this very messy and very tragic case. If you find this type of content interesting, please consider subscribing, liking this video, and leaving me a comment. That is the easiest way for you guys to support me and my channel. Don't forget to go to scentbird.com or check the description box for the link to get 55% off your first month at Scentbird by using my code SUMMER55OFF. And as always, I appreciate each and every one of you for watching, and I will see you next time.